Welcome back to Yahoo Finance. Well, home ownership has always been a part of the American dream, but for many minorities, including blacks, the dream is becoming unaffordable. Here to shed more light on the topic, we are joined by Kristen Myers, the Balance Editor-in-Chief. Kristen, thanks so much for being here. And this is a great topic, so I'm so glad you came on to discuss it. So the latest census data show that white home ownership held pretty steady last year at about 74%. However, black home ownership has seen a steady decline from the pandemic peak to about 43% at the end of last year. Why is that gap getting bigger?
Yeah, and one other thing to note there, Karina, is that this gap that's around 31 points right now is actually wider than the gap that existed 60 years ago in 1960 when it was 27 points. So why we're seeing this gap, or rather this decline, right now, I think probably a little bit of an impact from the pandemic. But also we have to say that this gap has existed again for 6 decades. It has been persistently wide. And I think really we have to look back in history for the answer to that. This is essentially just the cumulative and persistent and ongoing impact of, frankly, discriminatory policies that exist in the housing market.
Well, let's tick through some of the reasons why this is still happening all these years later. And the problems are very much the same as they were decades ago. Let's begin with redlining. How prevalent is that right now, and what has its impact continued to be on the Black community?
Yeah, so redlining doesn't exist in the open way that it existed in the 1930s, when it was an official policy of the banks to quite literally draw a red line around maps of areas where they were not going to give loans, or where only Black Americans or other minorities were essentially allowed to live. But we do see that there is segregation still to this day. It just doesn't happen as overtly as it once did, because redlining was essentially outlawed in 1960. But we still have studies to this day, even of agents sometimes, steering home buyers to certain areas that maybe have people that only look like them. So the effect of redlining still exists to this day, and it does still happen to this day, just not as openly as it once did.
Yeah, Kristen, my husband is African American, and he was looking to buy a home in St. Louis several years ago, and exactly the same thing happened to him, and he was directed in one direction when he made it very clear, because he's from there originally. No, this is not where I'm interested. I'm interested in another area. So it definitely does happen. You say the policy of urban renewal is a new threat to Black home ownership as well.
So urban renewal is something that actually has been going on for quite some time. And it essentially was a policy that allowed the government to raise and completely destroy a lot of Black neighborhoods in the name of, building a highway or putting in shops and malls and other amenities and centers. And we saw a lot of Black communities just be completely destroyed because of that. So, first you have a lot of these communities or a lot of African Americans, I should say, forced into certain areas, then creating, vibrant communities of culture, and then having those communities destroyed through this process of urban renewal. But a lot of what we are seeing now is a devaluation of assets that Black home buyers have. So a lot of folks, they do manage to purchase a home, and now they want to sell a home. And right now, is a really great time to go out there and sell a house. Homes are at record high prices. But when they go and get an appraisal, their home is worth far less than the homes that are owned by their white counterparts, sometimes next door or within their same neighborhood. And the cumulative impact of that is literally hundreds of billions of dollars of lost wealth that has been, in effect, stolen from the loss of the gains that could be made in that housing market, even once you do own that home.
So look, we know that home ownership is very closely tied to wealth and generational wealth. It remains a popular, way to increase wealth for all people in this country. What does this gap, what is the inability for a large number of the Black community to become first-time homeowners? How does that impact their overall wealth?
I'm really grateful that you asked that question, Alexis, because we have talked a lot about the racial wealth gap in the United States, how it has widened over time, how it has remained persistent despite, massive gains in the stock market, despite massive gains in the US economy, right? Why does this racial wealth gap still exist? Well, the point is, it's because of the home ownership gap that still exists. As you mentioned, home ownership still is the most popular, the most viable way that Americans can attain wealth. For most Americans, owning a home is going to be the largest asset that your family is going to have. So if you're first unable to purchase a home, and then even once you are able to purchase a home, your home is now worth less, that is real wealth that is being denied to you and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, and on it goes. I mean, in 2019, homeowners had 40 times more wealth than that of renters. And that's just real cumulative losses that happens every single year. So if we want to tackle that racial wealth gap, we're going to have to start looking at that home ownership gap as well.
Yeah, thankfully, there is much more light being shed on all of these unfair practices. We'll have to leave it there. Kristen Myers, the Balance Editor-in-Chief, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks.